Okay, so here we go. You've got your place, your time, you've got your journal. Hopefully the creative juice, you're at a place where the creative juices can flow. There's minimal distractions. So let's press into this. Now, before we think about the year that's to come, we're going to take some time to reflect on the year that's behind us. And there's some really great reasons why. One is there's some lessons that you learned over this last year that you really want to take the time to capture. There's some really good things that you stepped into, that shaped you, that shaped your relationship with others, with God. There's some experiences that you had that were valuable. And so you kind of want to take the time to learn those things. And there are some things that happened this last year that, moments that will be easily forgotten unless you take the time to really capture those moments. I know there's been more than once I've scrolled through photos and I thought, when did that happen? Who was that? Or I'm not sure what this was. And even though I have the visual right there, it's the moment's been forgotten. Well, what I want you to consider is as we press into this, there's some different areas to consider, some different arenas for us to press into that will kind of help dissect this out. And I want you to know this is something that I'm rather passionate about because several years ago I was a young minister, so I was new in my vocation. I was learning how to do this. I was trying to figure it out, and I knew that there was a lot of things I probably could have been doing better. And I had the chance to grab coffee with somebody who was about 25 years my senior, and I sat down with him. He was also a minister, and I remember distinctly asking this question. I said, so when you're my age, what do you wish you knew that you know now, right? That's a great question. And he looked at me and he kind of looked at me puzzled and he sort of had this distant look in his eye and he said, I don't think in those terms. Like, I just don't think about that. I kind of just embrace the moment and I move on. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, that's it? That's all you got? And we started talking about something else, something that was coming up, something that was in the future, which was fine, and I was grateful for that part of the conversation. But man, here was somebody who had a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge that they could pass on to me, but because they were not a reflective person, they didn't have anything to pass forward. And I guarantee that in that person's life, there were some things that they probably, history has a tendency to repeat itself unless you choose an intentionally different path. So I imagine because he didn't personally reflect, there's some things that he just kept having to re-experience over and over and over again because he wasn't learning the lessons. And so this is what I want for you is there's some great lessons that you learned and you already paid for it, right? You already went through the experience, you already spent the time. So let's learn those lessons and take that investment so you can move forward with greater agility in life. So what we're going to look at is this 4 arenas. So let's look at the first one. The first arena is this, your relationship with others. What are some key relationships that have changed over the past year? And what are the reasons for those change? So that could be anything from, you got a new pet. Man, that was a super cool thing. Or maybe you lost a pet. Maybe there was a new intimate relationship that you stepped into. Maybe you got married. Maybe you got engaged. Maybe you had a kid or you had another kid. I know for me, I had a loved one pass away this year. My grandmother passed away. That was a key relationship in my life. In fact, what was interesting is obviously, there's some situations and context around that. She was older in age and her health had been declining for a while. And when I went to the funeral, it was really powerful because I not only was able to honor her, but I was also able to reconnect with some of my family I hadn't seen in years. Well, man, that changed, right? And so I want to capture that. I want to make sure I highlight those things. So what are some of those key relationships and what are the reasons that there may have been some changes around those key relationships? Second area to consider is your relationship with your experiences. So what are some experiences you had this past year that shaped you and how did they shape you in a healthy way? So how did they shape you in a way that made you better, made you stronger? You have a clearer sense of what could be, what you're capable of. And then maybe you've had some experiences that were unhealthy. They just weren't good for you. They were some things that maybe happened to you, or some things that you did to yourself that, man, you want to make sure you track that information, because you do not want to go through that again if you can avoid it. So what are those lessons? What are the lessons that you can take away from those experiences? I have this phrase where I say, I want to know why the man who has 4 fingers has 4 fingers. And that comes from the relationship I have with a family friend I grew up calling him Uncle Tom. And when he holds up his hand, he does this. He's missing the top half of his index finger. And it turns out when Uncle Tom was a kid, he was mowing the lawn, and the mower got plugged up with grass. And instead of turning off the mower and then clearing out the grass, the blade kept spinning, and he reached in there and to pull out the grass. And anyway, you know the rest of the story. So Uncle Tom is missing the top half of his index finger. I want you to know that every time I mow the lawn and it gets clogged up, I think of that situation. Well, why? Because he passed that lesson on to me. He reflected on it. He reflects upon that probably nearly every day. Well, there are some lessons that I learned that I want to reflect upon those experiences, and not only will that be of value to me, but then I can also pass that on to others who may be going through something similar. So what relationships with experiences have shaped you over this past year? And then the next area is what's your relationship with God been like? How did you experience him this past year? What did you learn about him through those experiences? Another question might be, how did you not experience him in a way that maybe you were hoping for? I recently read Psalm 44. And in it, man, the psalmist is pouring out his heart because life is not good and God is not close. He's going through an incredibly difficult time. And he's just expressing that in very visceral and real language, in language that I can identify with for different seasons in my life where, man, I thought I was on the right track, or I thought I was doing the right things, and man, God just was not present. I wasn't experiencing him the way I was hoping for. I've been there. Maybe you've been there. Maybe this last year was like that for you. Maybe it was the opposite of that. Maybe you experienced God in some powerful ways. Maybe you got close to him, or you were able to draw closer to him in ways that you didn't anticipate, or that you were hoping for, and that hope came to bear. Your prayers were answered. So what was that like? What were those lessons that you were learned? Press into that area of thinking. And then what about your relationship with you? What did you learn about yourself this past year? What experiences gave you a sense of purpose, of meaning? And how would you define that purpose and meaning? And maybe that you'd be defining it a bit different now than you would have this time last year, because you've had those experiences. How are you with you? Are you in a good place with you? Are you frustrated with yourself? Are you proud of yourself? What's your relationship with you been like? What did you learn about yourself this past year? Maybe you came through some really hard things and some struggles, and you overcame those things. And maybe you faced some stuff and you didn't push as hard as you could have. You weren't as focused as you could have been. You weren't as disciplined. What are those things? Maybe you came up against a challenge and you overcame that, and you didn't realize you had that within you. What about you? Reflect on your relationship with you, what you learned about yourself over this past year. And then what I want you to do is, as you look at those things, you kind of walk through it, and then you're going to kind of gather it together and then summarize this past year. Define how you will remember that year and those set of experiences. And I remember it was a little while ago now. It was coming towards the end of a year, and I was talking with some folks, and they were complaining about the past year, and they were just ready for it to be over and entering into a new year where it was a fresh start, and they were excited. And when I asked them, what was so hard about it this year? It was just a hard year. And they were just kind of complaining and griping, and I think it was sort of in vogue to gripe that year about a year, as if we were just victims of a date, which I thought was peculiar. The irony of it is that year was 2019, and then when 2020 came, obviously our world changed in some pretty dramatic ways, and people are like, if we could only get back to 2019. I was thinking, there's a lot of people complaining back in 2019. Why? Because they let others define their year, and that's what I don't want to have happen to you. I want you to be able to define your year. How would you define this? What are the lessons that you learned? What are some key takeaways that you can step into the new year with? Because that's going to empower you to take some steps with a tremendous amount of confidence. Because there's some lessons that you learned that, man, like I said earlier, you paid for that lesson. You paid in time and you paid in experience. Hopefully you don't have to pay again. Just grab that lesson and apply the lessons learned, right? Because you took the time to reflect upon those things. This gives you a tremendous amount of momentum. And with that momentum, you're able to kind of open up maybe the aperture of how you're seeing life to some greater possibilities of what could be next. Because the next part of this is to discover. Now, oftentimes we like to press into the new, we like to press into the next, and I completely understand why. But before you move to that part 3, before you click that link, before you turn that page, camp out with these things. Begin here, because this is stuff you already know. You already know the answers to these things. There's not a single question here you don't know the answer to. Now, maybe you've never taken the time to write it out. You've never taken the time to verbalize it ever before in your life. So it might be a little messy. It might be a little awkward. That's okay. That's totally okay. It's completely natural. But you know the answers to all of these questions. So what are those answers? What do you need to write out? What do you need to get down on paper? And then how are you going to summarize this past year so that as you step into the next year, you're stepping in with a tremendous amount of confidence because you've been empowered based upon the work you've done, based upon the experiences you've already had. So step into that, and then in part 3, we're gonna talk about how to discover a sense of focus for what is to come.